Good morning, everyone. Today, I have a pleasure to interview Mr. Matt Towne, the state rep for Barrington, New Hampshire. Hey, Matt, good morning and welcome to Télésoleil de Boston show.
Good morning. This is Matt Towne. I am running for re-election to be the Barrington representative to the General Court in New Hampshire. I want to thank Towne and Dr. Joseph for recording this for a show and for distribution among the Barrington electorate.
What is the top 5 subjects you want to advance when you are re-elected?
So I appreciate the question you just asked, and it's a great question. Frankly, my top legislative priorities would include, I mean, there's many of them, but would include really strengthening our democracy. We have some holes appearing in our democracy, and I think we can take steps to fix that. One of the things that we can do is to have excuse-free absentee voting. We can have vote by mail, and a very important one, it would be the redistricting commission to redistrict the state of New Hampshire in terms of voting districts. The last few times that was done, it was pretty heavily gerrymandered. So the redistricting commission would be to include the Republicans and the Democrats and independent consultant to set out what the districts ought to look like. So all those things will strengthen our democracy, and that's a major priority for me. Other things would be to approach and re-envision or redo the way we fund our education. The New Hampshire Constitution, as well as 3 Supreme Court decisions, have decided that the way we're doing it now is not legal. So it has never been adequately addressed, and consequently, Barrington is paying much higher taxes than we should have to do. So that I'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later in the interview, but that's a big portion of what my initial priorities would be. Another item would be strengthening medical care here in the state. It's very clear by many studies that the way we fund and manage medical care is the least efficient and the least effective and most expensive way of doing that. So we need to redo that. And so much waste in the way we fund that through so many carriers that we can redesign that system. Even the Koch brothers study said that the way we're doing it now is very expensive. So another item in terms of what I would like to see going forward is renewable energy. We pay more for electricity than any other New England state, and one of the reasons that's the case is because of the way we do not supply or do not support renewable energy sources. We have a cap on solar energy. No other New England state has that. We end up spending more buying electricity from the New England power grid, and every time we do that, it costs us more to upkeep that grid. No other state spends as much as we do on maintaining that grid. So renewable energy sources, we can lower electric bills by raising the solar cap. Massachusetts and Maine have already gone down that path. Vermont has gone down that path. Rhode Island, Connecticut, we're the only state that has a solar cap, and that's wrong. It's inefficient and wrong. So those sort of encapsulate the major items that I would like to focus on.
Could you comment on the state of the town in general terms? So, what the challenges are and how we should go about meeting those challenges?
So that's a great question regarding our little town of Barrington here. What sort of challenges do we have here? Well, we have, like any small town, we have a number of challenges, but we have some unique ones here in Barrington. We have the second largest landmass of a municipality in the state. And so when you view the whole southern tier of New Hampshire, including the East Coast, most of the towns, Madbury, Durham, Greenland, Portsmouth, Dover, Rochester, those towns are essentially all built out. And so they haven't got a lot of room to expand. So if you're a young person or a professional or whatever, and you want to move into this area because it is a very desirable area to be in, then you'd look at Barrington. And so we have enormous growth happening and huge growth potential. And yet we don't really have the infrastructure to supply or to support all that. And right at the moment, we are sort of flying under some really old rules. For example, the 2-acre minimum is widely disparaged and rejected by the people who do city planning as a career. And the reason for that is that it forces all of our population out into the forests, which are the very thing we want to save. So, doing denser population with apartments for young workers and for senior citizens and going up, not out, is really the way that we need to envision the town. But we're not there. Our town is not supportive of that. We all want to hang on to our small town feeling, which I totally get. That's why I moved here. But we have to manage the growth, or we're going to lose what we could have out of this whole process. So more infrastructure, and that challenge is important. Another piece I'd point out in terms of a challenge here is that we have very low voter participation. We only had 23% vote in the last primary election. And as everybody would know that lives in town, we also had a library referendum last March. Only a little better than 30% voted on that. In spite of all the noise and all the heat and all the animation about that, only 30% of our town voted on that particular initiative. So we need to get more people voting, and we need to get more people running for office. In the last number of years, all 5 selectmen have run unopposed. That's not democracy. And I don't really care which political stripe is. We need to run for office and participate and get involved. And that I see as a unique Barrington challenge.
I see you are pushing for a revision in how we fund education in our state. Can you please address that here?
Again, another good question. I am advocating for a change in the way we fund education. That is a big topic, and I have held several meetings in town to present what's been known as a Volinsky presentation, and really is the New Hampshire Fair Funding for Schools presentation. And briefly what it means is that we have a very property poor town, meaning that the average cost of our housing here and properties is much lower than, say, a town like Moultonborough, Alton, Greenland, Portsmouth. Those towns have a very high property value, and so their tax rate is much lower. Our tax rate here in town is much higher because we do not have the value of that property. The way we conduct that tax rate is not allowed by the Constitution, but we're doing it anyway. The Constitution clearly states that educating our children is a state responsibility. And at the moment, we are not doing that adequately. And it really falls to the town. So all those costs have been downshifted from the state to the town. The state defines an adequate education as about $3,300 per student in terms of what it would cost. But in reality, Barrington spends $14,000. So that difference is your property tax. And that is much, much less. And our tax rate is around 22, give or take a little.
You have stated over and over again that you want to think globally and act locally. How does that apply to our little town of Barrington?
So thank you again for that question. To think globally and act locally is really an old 60s sort of philosophy, and I carry it to this day. I think it's a good way to approach local decisions. We need to look across the globe at what's going on and then start to make our decisions in recognition of that fact. So we can give you an easy and really pertinent example. We know that global warming exists. I'm not sure that my opponent agrees with that, but every scientist on the planet does agree with that. And so this notion of global warming, what we have 4 or 5 hurricanes already in the south, We have 4 or 5 more staging coming to us from across the Atlantic. The disaster that's occurring right now as we speak on the West Coast, these are all signs of things of a global warming system that's out of control. So what does that mean to us locally? Well, what it means is we can make local decisions that start to remove some of that carbon out of there. We can fortify solar energy. Recently, the voters approved the exemption for solar systems here in town. I think that's a great move forward. It's not yet enough, but that's certainly in the right direction. So, other things we can do, things like the building code. Recently, we updated the state building code to the 2015 standard. Not the most recent, we weren't able to get that far. But we did get from 2009 to 2015. The point is the building code carries those energy codes that houses are required to comply with. The house that we're sitting in right now, we built 8 years ago. And instead of having the standard R40 in the roof, we have R85. So we have much more insulation in the roof, and it costs virtually nothing more to put that up there. But that was our code. That's what we decided to do for our house. My point being is that we can take action that would cut our overall energy consumption and help in our own way that will help the global warming. Additionally, there's a fund called the RGGI Fund, which is IGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. That initiative was originally meant, it was funding from the Midwest based on acid rain, but what it can do, originally funded, was for winterizing low-income housing. And so with windows and doors that leak lots of cold air, then obviously you burn much more fuel. And that funding was meant for that purpose, and really targeted towards low-income housing. Unfortunately, under the Republican administration, they diverted that funding into rate relief. And in that situation, the average rate relief was about 19 cents on the average bill. So it really didn't accomplish anything, and it never addressed the underlying problem, which is poor quality housing. And so I would advocate, and to the degree that I have a voice, and I do have a voice, to redirect that RGGI funding back into low-income housing for the winterization projects. There's something really concrete we can do. The money is already there. It's just how we apply it. So I would advocate that good management locally will help these global issues.
A legislator is an important but very time-consuming role. Can you explain why you have to go through all this work just to be elected and then serve?
So your question is, what do I like about being a legislator? Well, I really do enjoy it. It is an enormous amount of work when it's done properly. It is not unusual at all to read anywhere from 100 to 300 pages of documents every week. And it's really, kind of dry, quite frankly, a lot of the stuff you have to read. But I really enjoy being part of the process. I like hearing the whole story. I like being able to ask, citizens and expert witnesses and even lobbyists, to justify their point of view in a hearing setting about whatever issue is coming before the committee or before the House. I like knowing the backstory. Nothing is as simple or easily reduced to an ideology as you might believe. My opponent, unfortunately, does view things in an ideological way, and at a practical level, that really doesn't work. Situations don't conform to an ideology. They conform to science, they conform to well thought out plans, they conform to getting everybody at the same table and sort of wrestling out what a solution might look like. And that I find really energizing and interesting and rewarding. I spent most of my life either as a nurse, as a Peace Corps volunteer, as an industrial safety consultant where I traveled worldwide getting programs up and running. And so this is really an extension of what I've done for my entire life. So I enjoy that. The other piece I really enjoy is constituent services. Somewhere between 30 and 40 people, I sort of lost count, have come to me with issues that they can't get resolved one way or the other. That includes housing, and includes getting a license plate, and includes getting a small business up and running when the state offices were closed because of COVID-19. It includes helping a constituent on getting housing that before she became homeless at the end of the month. These are all issues that have come up, and they come to me and say, how can you help us with that? Much of the time, it's simply walking through the problem and getting an organized plan on how we communicate with whatever agency is involved. Other times, it involves really sitting down and helping the person identify what they see as a problem, and that often is the biggest challenge. So I really enjoy constituent services, and I answer all emails, the exception being I don't answer bot mails, the ones that come from a mass mailing list someplace. But if you send me a personal email, you will get a personal response. And that's all part of being part of the legislature. You have to be available. I've conducted 8 come to the table meetings where I've discussed issues before the legislature and bills that are coming up, bills that were passed, and why they were passed, why they were defeated, and that's an effort to strengthen our democracy and bring people into that process. And I've had folks, a number of folks who have come and taken issue with one stand or another. But one-on-one, those are very respectful conversations, and I really encourage and embrace that notion. So I'm totally happy with people, calling me, send me an email. It's out there on the web. You can use my legislative address. My phone is on my Facebook page. So I really enjoy the legislative process. It's energizing and stimulating. But I will tell you, I'm not an ideologue. I voted against my party on occasion, and when I thought that was appropriate to do and sustain the governor's veto on one particular bill that comes to mind. So it isn't a rubber stamp for the party, but it is a measure of involvement, and I'd like to have you involved with me.
Matt, thank you for coming to Télé Soleil de Boston show, and I wish you the best.
So thank you, Dr. Joseph, for the opportunity to speak with you. I've really enjoyed the interview, and I asked the voters out there in Barrington to vote for me November 3rd. It is my birthday, so it'll be a great birthday present. But mostly I want everybody to get out there and vote. I want your voices heard. So again, thank you for Télé Soleil for the opportunity to speak with you, and feel free to send me questions.